We're going to get into my class that I gave. I've given this before, and I gave it last week, and I'll show you who I gave it to. So what story do you want to tell? Your camera is a tool, and you got to use your tool, and composition is one of the tools you use to tell your story. And it's a big part of how you tell your story. My goal for this class is to increase your composition vocabulary. Just like words. The more words you know, the better you can tell your story. And in our game here with your camera, it's all about knowing the various tools to tell your story with. And this is from the class I gave last week at the Carmel High School. These guys were happy campers. I gave them each a copy of my book, Advancing Your Photography. It was just really heartwarming for me to see this next generation coming up the line so enthusiastic about learning photography and video. Awesome. And I'm actually going to be taking on a couple of these guys as interns, which is pretty cool. So I'm not going to belabor this. You guys should know from my books and what I've told you before that there are 5 stages of photography. Quickly, visualization is getting it in your mind before you press the shutter, before you even pick up a camera, because you don't even know what camera you're going to use until you got it visualized. Let's say you're going to shoot underwater. Well, you want a GoPro. If you're shooting a video, obviously you have to have a camera that shoots video. You might want to shoot film. Whatever your vision is, you're going to then use your equipment here. You can see that's the next thing. You got to know your equipment. And as our friend Bob Holmes says, know your camera so well that it doesn't get in the way of your photographs. That can happen. You want to capture, which is what composition is. It's capturing. Lighting is also capturing. Timing is also capturing. And then you process your images. I just finished a Lightroom class, a brand new one. Jared edited. It's going to come out really soon. You guys will see that. And then finally, you want to share your work to the world. Then you go, and I want you guys to try these tools out. You can't just leave this in your head. You got to put them to use. So make a note of these things. If you got my book, go out and use them. Lorraine did an amazing thing. She actually, I believe, covered all 83 of them. If she didn't, she covered a huge chunk of them, and she sent me an example. I love seeing that. So I'd love to see you other guys do that as well. So how to advance your composition. Let me fix that so we're not cut off there. Don't get hung up in the rules. Train your eye. You got to use your eye. You got to go out and find images. Use your skills of visualization, and remember, these are guides. They're not rules. They're not inflexible laws. They're things that you use to tell your story, but don't get hung up in any rules. There are no rules to composition. Okay, training your eye is really important. Do that. Do what you see Holly doing here. You can do it this way. You can do it that way. I generally just do this. Anytime you're out and about, you're taking a walk, you're in a line at a grocery store, you're on a train, people will think you're really cool. It's a cool thing to do this. And just like every sport, you've got to constantly train. You've got to train your eye. You've got to look for photographs. They don't just jump out at you. You've got to find it. Where can we upload our image? I'm not sure which one you're talking about. We're not taking any images today, but maybe Jared can answer that question. The very first lesson I learned was from my uncle, Sambo. He was a World War II Top Gun pilot, also an avid photographer. You can see him shooting a selfie in a mirror with his Nikon F. And he took me out and showed me the first thing I needed to know was how to frame a photograph. Framing is putting an edge or a border on your photographs by finding and including a natural frame like a tree branch or the edge of a building, and it helps the viewer see what you want them to see. It adds depth, layer, interest, and even contrast to your photograph. I'll show you some examples. I'm not going to show Chris Burkhart's interview. I'm not actually set up with that. We'll do that another time. This is an example of a frame. This is a fence in Big Sur, and you can see the fence and the tree branch form the edge of the frame that's closest to you in the foreground. And that actually gives you a border and it gives you a layer. And then what it does is it puts your attention on the background, which is the road and the mountain range. This is the Santa Lucia Mountains going into the ocean. You put that together, and your frame helps your eye go where you want the viewer to go. This is another example of a frame, and this is a photograph I took in high school. I was basically about the same age the kids that I taught last week were, which is one of the reasons I was so excited to do the class. I went off in my senior year, if you could read about it in my book, Create, right here. I tell a story about it. I went off in my senior last semester high school, went to to above Mazatlan, which is actually even with the tip of Baja California, up in the mountains. 1 day by Jeep, 2 days by foot into this very remote village. You'd hardly call it a village, it was a hut. And we built a medical dispensary. These people back there had no medical help. This was one of the workers that we worked with. His name was Fausto, a really cool guy. He looks much more serious than he generally does. But I framed him in the window. And I got him to give me a kind of a tough guy look. It's the look that was much more interesting than if he was smiling or frozen. A lot of times you'll see people, especially in countries where they're not used to being photographed, they'll freeze up. You don't want that. But using the frame of the window really helped show, where do you want me to look? And this is another frame right next to it. It just adds interest and depth. This is an example from our friend Bob Holmes of framing between people. And the guy who's singing, the light is coming off of his book there, which is really cool. But he's framed between these people. So you can use almost anything as a frame to help exemplify who you're looking at. So you notice I crossed out the law of thirds. It's not a law, it's a tool. And you can use it. It doesn't always work and you don't always need it. There's many, many great photographs where the subject is dead center or way off to the one side. You know, there's all sorts of places you can put somebody. But in this case, this was a photograph by David Smith, who I interviewed. This is from the Kruger National Park, where I met him in South Africa. And he said you can try placing what you want to draw attention to in one of the lines, the intersection of lines, and it can add a dynamic pull to there's a little, anyway, we'll fix that later, to your eyes. Now, one thing he said that's really important is leave space wherever your subject is looking, leave space for them to look into. What would happen if it was cropped right here? It would feel very claustrophobic. It'd feel like the subject can't really get their space, their view. So always leave space for your subject. Same thing is true if the subject is looking down or up into the frame. Leave space for them to look into, like the leopard is basically slanting down. Leave space for that leopard to look into. Please subscribe and enable the bell so you don't miss any of our new shows. Like the video and please share it and leave your comments. I love hearing from you. And remember to get out and capture your own images of life.